Are you a busy parent? Do you feel like you're being pulled in multiple directions all at once? Are you exhausted and overwhelmed? Meet my mom. Her name is Santi Tenikela. She's a pediatrician, expert in mind-body medicine, and a life coach. She can help you break free from guilt and overwhelm so that you can enjoy the life that you've worked so hard to create. She can also teach you how to support your family in a more holistic way.
Hello and welcome to the I Am Well MD podcast. Today we have a special guest. I'd like to introduce Dr. Sharon Stein. Dr. Stein is a colorectal surgeon and adjunct professor at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. She has served as the president of the Association of Women Surgeons, as chair of the American College of Surgeons Women in Surgery Committee, and on the executive council of the American Society of Colon and Rectal Surgeons. She has worked for Doctors Without Borders as a surgeon in both South Sudan and Haiti. As an academician, Dr. Stein has published over 150 articles, editorials, and chapters on a variety of topics, from minimally invasive surgery to diversity in surgery. She has written extensively on minimally invasive surgery, colorectal cancer, and enhanced recovery protocols, as well as gender disparities in surgery, including pay equity, pregnancy in surgery, and intimate partner violence, and is a senior author on a landmark trial on coaching. She was the first woman to receive an honorary fellowship from the Association of Surgeons of Great Britain and Ireland. Additionally, Dr. Stein works as a professional development and leadership coach through her program, The Intentional Surgeon. She speaks on coaching, leadership, and professional development, nationally and internationally, and regularly works with societies and institutions to deliver professional development content to their staff and trainees. She's the founder and CEO of The Intentional Surgeon. Welcome, Dr. Stein.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and getting to spend some time with you.
I'm thrilled to have you here too. Just for all of you to know, I've heard Dr. Stein talk and she is on fire. So I'm thrilled to have her on the podcast. Dr. Stein, tell us a little bit about what drew you to surgery. Tell us about your path.
Oh, we could do the whole podcast probably on this. So I am the non-traditional student. It's actually funny because when I look back on my career, people actually said, gosh, you played the game right. You did everything you were supposed to do to get there. And it's so interesting because I had no idea where I was going. So there was no there to get to, if that makes sense. I am the daughter of two physicians. My sister was always going to be the surgeon in the family. My dad's a surgeon, my mom's a pediatrician. And my younger sister, so she went off and went to medical school, and I did all different types of things. I actually led outdoor education programs. I cooked in restaurants. I sold real estate for a while, all the different things. And then all of a sudden got to a point where I was like, I'm not doing anything that's making a difference in my life, and I really want to. And then thought about going back to school to get an advanced degree. And somebody very smart said to me, I thought about nurse practitioner or physical therapy. And they said, you're not going to be happy unless you're the boss. And so ended up going back, doing all my prerequisites, which I had none of, to go to medical school. And then in medical school, I actually thought I was going to be a pediatrician. I did camp for kids with cancer and a program for buddies for kids with sickle cell and things like that. And when I went onto my rotations, the doing of surgery was so in line with what I need to do because I'm a doer. I'm not really good about talking about things forever. The intellectualization of things kind of bores me after a while. I want to make change. And with surgery, I could bring a patient to the operating room, take out their colon, and their cancer was gone. I just did something. And that for me was just the right balance of being able to affect change in a really concentrated period of time and feeling like I was making a difference for people.
That's amazing. I can definitely relate to the doing, the desire to do and to affect change. I think one thing I realized was sometimes it's so easy to keep going and never step back to reflect on the process.
Yeah.
So I know that there were some areas that you have opted to pivot on. So as you were building your family and career, were there areas where you found your balance falling apart? I'm going to say
Yeah,
life-life balance instead of work-life balance because work is part of our life. Things at work could be great, but things in the rest of your life might be leaving something.
yeah. Well, I'm going to actually, before we even get to how I changed it, I actually hate work-life balance myself too. Because to me, that brings to mind that we're supposed to be on some tightrope. Remember that picture that you see of like the woman in business suit, and she's carrying a briefcase in one hand and she's like leaning different ways, and she has the kid in one arm and then like, whatever she's doing for work in the other. It brings to mind that there is this moment where everything will be static and we can create a balance that works in that moment. But we know that the only consistent is change,
Hmm.
right? And even if we get to balance, that's not going to be balanced in 10 minutes or 20 minutes ago. Like it's a moment in time. But so I like work like integration because if you can figure out how to integrate your work in your life, you don't need to have balance because it's never going to be even Steven. It's going to be some mix of work and some mix of life. And you're the same person no matter where you are. So I would just always hated work-life balance, and I have for a while. In terms of your real question, which was how did that work for me? I think it was something that came up really early. So I met my husband in residency. I worked for a couple of years. I was a couple of years ahead of him. And then we moved to Cleveland, got married. He started his fellowship here in Cleveland, and we had a kid about 2 years later. And about a year into after we had her, I realized like I was just treading water and not doing very well. And that I had no time for any of the things that really mattered to me. And I was afraid that this kid that I'd waited so long to have would never even know who I was or what I was about. And so I took the courage to go to my bosses and say, I want to work 4 days a week. And this was, I'd been here for about 3 years, I guess, at that point. And I asked them to decrease my salary because I didn't want to have that responsibility. For me, it was really important to be up on like everyone to know that I just didn't come in on Wednesdays. That was the day. And I started spending Wednesdays with my kid when she was a year old. And I didn't have a nanny that day. And when she got older, I could go to the bank or I could go do things or I could get my hair done or whatever else I needed to do. And it made me more productive in my time when I was at work because on Tuesday night, if I had to stay late to do an operation, I wasn't like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to see my kid until like if I happen to be off this weekend. Because I knew Wednesday I was going to be there when she woke up and I was going to be there when she went back to sleep. And it was going to make all the difference. And so, one of the things for me in terms of work life integration was realizing that it doesn't have to be all or nothing and that we need to advocate for ourselves and ask for what we need. Like I didn't have to stop being a surgeon because I wanted to see my kid more, right? I just had to figure out, change some of the boundaries that other people had said, well, a surgeon works full time. I didn't know any surgeon who was working 4 days a week, like that just wasn't a thing. And people actually, interestingly, like my mentors, some of them were like, your academic career is over. Well, I will tell you, clinically, I became more successful, academically became more successful, personally, I became more successful, and I was more happy because I advocated for what I needed in order to make that work. And I kept that going the entire time. She's now 13. And yeah, like she's the entire time I was full-time employed, I didn't work on Wednesdays.
That's amazing. I had encountered something similar when I was in medical school and preparing to go into pediatrics. I was told that part-time would be really frowned upon. I was surprised because I was like, pediatrics, like we are focusing on children and families. How is me focusing on my children, family, like how is that frowned upon? You would think that would be celebrated. But ultimately, especially those of you who are listening that are my patients, know that I don't work every day in the clinic setting. And that actually helps me to help people more. So I think that's a great piece that you've touched upon, Sharon. Do you feel like you had pushback from your colleagues when you did transition initially? I don't know about colorectal surgery specifically, but I vaguely remember that surgery when I was in training was a very male dominated field, and your absolute sacrifice was really something of utmost importance. So, how was that received on when you first transitioned?
I was really nervous. I actually remember walking into my boss's office when I was like preparing to have this conversation. And I remember the butterflies in my stomach and feeling like, oh my gosh, this is going to be the end of something. This was the end of all my academic dreams or my professional dreams. And he actually was really supportive. I think he probably saw that I was struggling, right? Because most of the time when we're struggling, it is apparent to those people who look and care around us. And I think he probably saw that things weren't working as well and I wasn't having the success that I wanted to have or that he wanted me to have, right? As one of his people in the division. And when I did it, I was the only female in the group. And I had male partners who covered for me on Wednesdays. They would see my patients, they would round on my patients as well. And then I'd be back. But I would say two things, I think. One, I think it surprised everyone when I was more productive. And there's actually data, and it's not just for surgery. There's data that says that when we're doing something else with some of our time, we're actually more productive with the time that we're more efficient, more productive with the time that we actually use. And it's the same thing like Google does, right? Or these big tech companies do. They actually sometimes have people doing side projects because they find that they're so much more effective when some of their time is they're using their brain in a different way. So there's that. I will say on the downside that after that, I was always told that I was part-time. So here I was, a surgeon working 80.8 FTE, getting paid a zero point 0.8 FTE, doing as many RVUs as any of my partners who were busy 5 days a week. I was just condensing it into 4 days a week. And I became a professor of surgery. Wrote papers, I talked at conferences, I did all of those different things, but I had this ability to figure out how that time was going to happen. And it just made me more effective. The other thing that's really funny is that sometimes people, if they're doing research or they're doing an administrative task, they also are not clinically 1.0, right? Full
Right.
time. And that's deemed okay. But taking back the time for something different, deemed as being less than. And I was my entire career, I will say after that, some people called me like part-time. Sharon works part-time. And I was probably working. I mean, most of my days I would go to the hospital, probably leave my house at 6, get there by 6:15. I live really close to the hospital. Rarely get home less than a 12-hour day and often more than a 12-hour day. So I'm working 48 hours in the hospital, not including call and weekends, and that's part-time. It's just an interesting like juxtaposition, right?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting that piece in medicine. I recall my very first job coming out of residency. I did work 4 days a week. It was called full time, but my hours were such that I had a long day and I worked every other weekend. I was on call every other night. So it was rigorous, but it was interesting to me because we physicians, we come out of our schooling thinking that 40 to 80-hour work weeks were normal. That was just part of the deal. And so when I found out that the rest of the world considered, I think it was like 30 hours, a full-time job, I was like, oh, that is life-changing for me. Like 30 hours a week is full-time?
Yeah.
That's amazing. What am I doing with my life? No wonder everybody else seems so much more relaxed. But, it was definitely a wake-up call to see how the rest of the world was functioning when I finally had the means to be able to come up for air.
And one of the things I think is that when we're working with that much pressure, and I think in the time that I've been a physician, things have only gotten worse, right? Where they're telling us how many patients we need to see in our clinics in a certain amount of time. The EMR is more oppressive. There's like lots and lots of pieces that are more oppressive than it used to be. And as they're condensing, the thing that we find is that there's very little time to actually think and to actually like ponder things. I mean, physicians in general are some of the smartest people I know. If you just use them as widgets to get things done, you're not getting the best out of them. and what actually could be achieved. Like, how are we supposed to make advances in terms of patient care, in terms of our medical practice, if we don't really give ourselves the time to think, to ponder, to explore options, to experiment? Like, those things are so important in what we do.
I absolutely agree. Ingenuity is at an all-time low. I feel like not because people are not ingenious. I feel like people have great ideas. I feel that we are stifled by systems that don't always allow the time for development and implementation simply because we need to have those metrics met all the time. So, and
Yeah.
I think certain institutions tend to be a little bit more malignant in this way than others, for sure. I think there's some leaders who are very interested in innovation and others not so much. So, more and more, I'm seeing physicians come out of the woodwork and create their own little niches here and there, or like you and I, businesses here and there, where we can actually bring our calling, bring our ingenuity into the world and then attract the people that need it. It's something very different than what we are always able to do in the clinical setting or in your case in the OR.
It shouldn't be surprising, right? It's interesting that, again, these really bright people who went into medicine, who are then really controlled in terms of what they can do and how much time they can do it and whether or not they can order a test or whether or not they can prescribe a certain medication. There's all this like control on top of us and guardrails on what we can do, that the idea that maybe we want to go in and we want to do physician side gigs, and you think about physicians wanting to have some space to innovate and be creative and do things that are outside the box or change culture or whatever it is. And it shouldn't be surprising to us that these people, these really bright people, want to use some of their creative energy in ways that they get to decide.
It's great that people are finding the strength to be able to bring their true selves into the world. And I can't help but wonder how many people have made the choice to continue to hide and are just waiting for that right opportunity. And I'm just going to put it out there that sometimes people are not going to wait for you to bring it out. So if you have a great idea, just do it. Just put it out there for the world to see.
So
We're
hard
waiting
though,
for
right?
permission. We don't need permission.
We don't, but and this is one of the things, like when we actually met, I gave a talk about the indoctrination of medicine, right? And one of the things that's so true is that we have invested so much in becoming these physicians, right? Like we have invested our time, we have invested money, our families have invested time and money. We missed birthdays and weddings and all different types of things that mattered to us. We fell asleep at Thanksgiving dinner, like whatever it was. And then the institution of medicine, not necessarily the place where you work, but the institution of medicine says this is the way it's supposed to be. And like when you and I become rebellious and decide to like take back some of our time or have a side gig and do something besides what they have defined medicine as, it threatens like the whole profession of medicine in a way, right? Because this is the way medicine's supposed to be. And for those who are still in it, it's much easier for them to other us and to say, this is a person who is not as successful as they wanted to be as a physician. They're not as accepted as they wanted to be as a physician. There's some reason that they left, and it has to do with them being bad rather than, wow, I have this creative like need and I want to fill it. And I want to do something that's actually going to make change or really improve the science of medicine or the culture of surgery, whatever it is that you want to do. And instead, they're like, oh, wait, those people must be other. They must not be good enough to have made it in medicine.
I love that you're focusing on this. So, one thing that came up for me when I had switched from full time to part time, I do in air quotes,
That's
is the feeling, the worry that other people would perceive me as a failure, think that I couldn't hack it. And so, I gleaned from some of your talks and podcast episodes that perhaps this was something that came up for you. But to venture to say that actually, yeah, I agree. I feel like my life is richer for the decision that I made, but in the moment, it felt really scary. What if my colleagues look at me as a failure? I don't feel like a failure. I feel like I've earned my place in this profession and it was a really tough road to get here. I struggled, but I'm here and all the other metrics are saying that I'm supposed to be here or I'm allowed to be here, but now if I'm making this choice, there's a level to which that I was worried that I would be cast out or that I wouldn't be taken as seriously.
I think that's really valid. And I will say for myself, I know that there are people who are like, oh, what happened to Sharon? Did she have a quality problem? Was she like, couldn't take it anymore as a surgeon? You're going to have those haters, and every winner has haters. But the thing is, when you find your power and you actually find the thing that you're like your flow state, the things that you are best at doing, you have to make choices, right? You can't do everything and be really powerful in one direction. And to me, it's the decision to realize that people are going to say what they want to say, and it doesn't matter. And if I can be successful, and success is my metric of what success is, right? It's not your metric of whether or not you've decided I'm successful. It's maybe my family's metric of whether or not I'm successful, like the people who really matter to me, maybe not, that matters. And you have to have the courage to be able to say, this, like I could do the mundane. And to be honest, surgery for me became mundane. I
Mm.
could continue being mundane, but every other surgeon can do exactly what I'm doing. But if I'm really powerful as a coach and leading culture change in surgery and professional development, I don't know 50,000 people who could do that. I know 50,000 people who can take out a colon. You know what I mean? Like it's a really different thing.
Yeah.
And so if this is what that gives me joy and makes me feel really good, then this is so much more powerful than what I can do as a surgeon. And I will just say, and one other thing, at least for me, if I take out one colon, I've helped one person and their family. But if I can help surgeons feel like they actually have autonomy and power and control and satisfaction and flow in their jobs again, then all the people that they help and all the people that they mentor and all the people they are around are affected, because all of a sudden we have a happier workforce and people who are doing what they can do more effectively and with more happiness.
Yeah.
Created such a bigger impact. And for me, it's about the impact. It's not about the number of colons I can put in a bucket.
No, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. We all have different definitions of success. And I remember a version of me who was very ambitious, very goal oriented, and life was very linear, right? You go to kindergarten, you go through all the grades, you go off to college, you go off to, at that point it's up to you, but right, like med school, law school, become a teacher, right? Like you go down this very linear path for a really long time, and we're trained to believe that this is it, right? Once you finish the path, that there's nothing else left but just continuing to do that job, right? And so I think that's a very limited view of, oh, I hit the top, I'm successful. Because I find that a lot of people reach this phase in their life where things become mundane, or they're seeking out something new. They're seeking out better alignment, something that is more in line with their life's purpose and their life's values. And so if they don't know what their values and their purpose are, this creates some sort of dissonance in their life that literally will scream at them, and they might not really pick up. It just feels terrible in the body, right? It feels terrible in your mind. I see a lot of people have anxiety about their jobs or their life situations, or feelings of depression, or just, again, that malalignment, and they haven't identified where it is that they need to grow because they've never actually conceptualized it or asked themselves where they want to grow. So I love that you were able to say that, right? Like if surgery became day-to-day mundane for you, here is this beautiful skill set that you have now brought into the world in a meaningful way and are able to implement to the masses, like you're giving it to the masses, and they're then able to affect change within their specific social circles now. That includes their spouses, their kids' teachers, their patients' families. I mean, what a wonderful gift. It really is.
So cool. And I think it's one of the three reasons that people come in for coaching, that reason where they kind of have been on this conveyor belt
Mhm.
and all of a sudden they're like, where am I even going? Is this even the path I want to be on? Like, I don't know. I don't know if what I'm doing is what I want to be doing. And I don't know where it is I want to go. That's one of the three reasons people come. The other reason they're skill acquisition because they do know where they want to go. And I will say in surgery, and I think all of medicine, we don't actually teach skills of communication, emotional intelligence, negotiation in anywhere in our medical school residency or practice, right? Like those are all kind of like pick them up as you come. And those are actually just as much of a skill as learning how to examine a patient and learning how to do a colectomy, right? Like we can teach people those skills. And then the third reason is because, and I think this happened for me too, is that you all of a sudden get to a place and you feel like you should have opportunity and people aren't seeing the same potential that you're seeing in yourself. And there's a disconnect between how you think you're showing up and how people are perceiving that you show up. And then they need to realign those two things so that you can show up and show the skills that you have. And actually, it's usually just like tweaks that we need, but we're not understanding how somebody else needs to be communicated with. We're not understanding how to manage up or manage down. And once we get those things, we're so much more effective and we can take off.
All good points. How do you feel like your skill set, this piece on coaching, how do you feel like that was received way in the beginning of your career when it came to coaching specifically?
So I will say that for me, as I said, it was like kind of this misalignment where I was like, oh my gosh, I really see myself as a leader. I really see myself as like I could be a chair, I could be these things. And I remember actually there was this conversation where I walked into my boss, then my then boss's office, and there was an opportunity for a leadership. And I said, do you see me as a leader? And the person just said no.
Ooh.
There was no like, no, you really need to work on your communication. You're not really good at delegation. You can't negotiate well enough. Like, here are the things you need to do. It was just no. And what was really cool was that empowered me because one, I realized that this person wasn't going to help me get the skills that I needed. I was now responsible for doing that. And the other thing was that when they just said no, I kind of walked away from what they thought and said, okay, you don't have to see this potential in me, but I still see this potential. And it's my opinion that matters. But now I need to gather these skills so that other people can see these potentials in me. And so I started in professional development, and that's why that's such a key component of how I coach, I think, is that in teaching people how to communicate, how to read personality styles, how to understand other people, how to negotiate, how to emotionally regulate, all of these different pieces were the first part. And I learned them myself. I actually got into coaching because I started facilitating professional development and we were sending people in the program outside to be coached.
Mhm.
And in academia, we don't get paid for the extra stuff that we do. So I was doing all this facilitation on my own time, and they paid me back by sending me to do my coaching certificate. And what was really cool was once I got those skills, I started using them for like, particularly for residents who were having trouble with communication or how they were showing up, not necessarily because most of our residents, most of our faculty are not having trouble with the clinical or the technical, which are really important in surgery, but they're having trouble with that third component, the leadership, the communication, the soft skills of emotional intelligence. And so I started getting the residents who are having some trouble with those places and coaching them. And my institution was really excited about me doing this because I was able to work with residents to figure out how they were showing up and how they could do things differently and help them get to a place where they could be more successful. And then I started doing a little bit on the side and kind of growing it. So I think they were happy to have somebody doing that. They weren't happy to pay for somebody to do that, but they were happy to have somebody who had those skills in the division or the department.
And I bet it made your whole department richer for that. It must have really asserted some level of culture change to have a person who advocates for good communication, and really not just good communication, but the building of a community where there's some cohesiveness and some compassion there.
We started doing for our interns, a professional development course. So like once every 6 weeks or so, we would take all the interns, we'd create their own little group, and they would come and we would do a communications workshop or a values workshop or a strengths workshop or a conflict management workshop. And it created community for them. So they felt like this was a really safe space, and it created a lot of continuity in that intern class. And then the other thing that I think it really did was it gave them language to be able to talk about when they had problems or when they had trouble with somebody.
Mm.
Oh, well, maybe I have trouble because I'm not understanding their communication style. Maybe that's why, myself and this other resident are getting into conflict, or I'm not working well with this attending. And it just giving people that kind of language, just like when you went to medical school and all of a sudden, we talk about like colorectal, like those were words that were foreign to us, but talking about people's communication styles are just as foreign to us. And just like we learned those pathology and the pathophysiology of things, we can learn those words to make us better communicators.
Love it. So, on the horizon of communication, one of the things that I have been hit with again and again, both inside and outside of the clinic, is misogyny, sexism. And so, having had this experience of going through medical school in what was a male dominated field and is now becoming a more female, I don't want to say female dominated, it's becoming more equal in terms of numbers. But I will say that there are times where I still see misogyny in the workplace or misogyny outside of the workplace. Like, I can't tell you how many of my male classmates were just disrespectful of women and women's bodies and would make comments or say things or do things that, oh my gosh, these guys became doctors. Like, where's the professionalism? Like, maybe you're professional in your medical life, in your career, but outside, like, oh my goodness. But I
Yeah.
would say that, right, it bleeds through. So if you have this certain mindset about women, whether you're inside or outside of the office, sometimes that bleeds through. So is that something you ever encountered? And if so, how did you handle that? I mean, it was actually one of the reasons why I did not consider surgery on my top 5 list for careers. Because very early on in my surgical rotation as a med student, I had one guy asking me out constantly. I had another, more senior surgeon who was making questionable comments in the OR when I was the only woman there surrounded by men. Like, oh, it made me so angry.
Yeah, there's no question it still happens. And it still happens in so many different ways, right? Like, first of all, I think a lot of the women who were initially successful in medicine and in surgery were women, but they were still acting like the men to a large extent. And so it didn't change the culture just because they were women in leadership positions. It's still the same culture. It's just that there's a woman in charge of it. Um, I think there are a number of different ways, and this is just such a frequent topic. I think one of the things in terms of doing is realizing how to quote unquote safely speak up in an environment. And sometimes it's as simple. And one of the things I like the best, I mean, if you're a humor type of person, you can use humor. But even when somebody says something that's really inappropriate, just to ask them to repeat it. I'm sorry, what did I hear you say?
Ooh.
For a lot of people, that simple piece can be enough to kind of call out that that was not an appropriate thing to say. And sometimes things like we all, particularly in our pressure environments and when we're comfortable, we just kind of like spout things that we didn't mean to say. I mean, like we have to give people grace too to be able to do that. But just asking them, are you going to say that again? or not. And then we kind of go, okay, I really meant something or I didn't really mean something. But I think that's a pretty safe way that even when you have a hierarchy, and in surgery, there's a lot of hierarchy,
Mhm.
where you can call somebody out. And I think that's one of the things. I think there's still so much, unfortunately, misogyny. We're seeing it now where it's really frequent that we're hearing about women who are practicing surgeons who, because they don't like the way they are, like oftentimes the comments have nothing to, they're not solid comments. They're just like, well, you made somebody else uncomfortable, or you acted like the B word, or you, but it's not, it's like, what did the person actually do? Your tone wasn't appropriate. It's things that aren't kind of solid things that you can change. Like you have a resting face that just seems really unhappy. I've heard that comment from my residents and from, not about me, but about them.
Yeah.
And those are things that are just kind of, they're really difficult to change. And then what ends up happening is in surgery, particularly, you're always going to have complications. You're always going to have some problems. Like that's actually the expectation. But those problems can either be like, oh, it happens to everybody, or, oh, wait, now you're a quality issue. And we can get rid of somebody we don't like because you don't fit our perception of what the culture should be. And we can use the fact that there are complications against you. And I think it's really destructive and it's a really hard space. And I think we're seeing this more with women than we do with men. Although I think it's happening all over the place. There are institutions that are kind of running out people they don't like, people who speak up because they're doing those types of things. I guess that kind of gets off the misogyny piece, but I think it has to be acceptance of all different types of people. I think misogyny is just one way. I mean, we have racism as well, right? We have lots of different ways in which people are othered, and it doesn't make a difference what direction you're othered. Like, can you do the job? Can you take good care of patients? In surgery, can you operate? Can you have good quality outcomes? And I think, to some extent, can you communicate? But if we never taught you how to communicate, are we just expecting that you've just learned that? Are we going back to like you learned it in kindergarten or you didn't? Because I don't think most kindergartners are really good communicators.
Well, it's just interesting to think that there is a different standard for how women should communicate. And again, air quotes with the should, right? Versus like what our male counterparts are expected to do in terms of their communication, right? Like if someone says something, the tone might be different coming from a woman than coming from a man. It might
100%.
actually be more acceptable if it came from a man than a woman. So why is the man more assertive for saying this, but if a woman says the exact same thing, it comes off as being non-compliant or too boundaried, right? Like if a man asks for his schedule to be blocked to be able to see a specific patient who's very complex, and a woman does, like sometimes I feel like that's perceived as too needy or, what's that about? Like, really?
It's so interesting. I'll go back to a story, and this goes back to my residency. I remember I walked in on morning rounds. I was rounding by myself as an intern, starting off, and there was a patient who was having active chest pain. So I walked back out to the nurses station, and in general, I got along great with the nurses. I wasn't somebody who was a problem, had problems with the nurses or anything like that. And I said, hey, I need an EKG in room 12. And so I went back in, like got the patient comfortable. I can't remember if there was oxygen, and maybe I turned on oxygen, did something. Nobody came in. So I walked back into the nurses station and I said, hey, I need an EKG in room 12. The patient's having I probably said they were having active chest pain, but they're having active chest pain. I need an EKG, and a set of vitals. I need, this kind of stuff. And I probably brought the vital thing in myself, to take their blood pressure and do that. And they still didn't come. So I did it a third time. And afterwards, one of the nurses came up to me and said, gosh, Sharon, we thought you were our friend. Like, how could you talk to us like that?
Hmm.
It was so interesting because when I got into surgeon mode or physician mode and was trying to take care of my patient in a directive way, that was perceived as no longer being their friend. They forgot that I was actually there to do a job.
Yeah.
And my job was to preserve the care and the safety of my patients. And that's what I was doing. And I'm married to a male surgeon. And the way he gets to talk to his residents, his staff, completely different than I would ever be able to do. And I think there is such a difference in how we can do that or how we are allowed to do this. And it's just a completely different set of rules. And I think that is something that we have to wear down. But the problem is that when we say, gosh, we just need to change the system, we don't have control over how other people act around us. And when we give up that control, we say, okay, the system has to change because I'm going to be this way. We've taken no responsibility and we have no ability to actually create change.
Huh.
We have to own some of that responsibility and say, okay, this is the way the system is now. That's where I'd like it to be, but this is the way the system is now. How can I work in this system to be more effective and to get what I need for my patient who's actively having chest pain and work on changing the system? But we can't abdicate and just say the system has to change and I'm just going to be where I am
Correct.
because it's not going to change by itself.
Yeah. So this came up in a very interesting conversation between myself and my husband, who's also a physician, where there was a peer that had gotten a promotion, an administrative promotion over me for a position that I was very well qualified for. And in fact, perhaps more qualified for. And I will say, in terms of being more qualified, it was that I had the experience, I had the board certifications, I had gone through the educational process to be able to stand where I stood, and yet I wasn't receiving any recognition. And in fact, I was told to stand down. I remember being so deeply offended. Like, what did I do wrong?
Yeah.
What did I do wrong? And it took a lot of introspection and outrospection to recognize I did nothing wrong. I was fine just the way I was. But whoever was around this particular person and around me did not perceive us as equal. And that was kind of it was a wake-up call. It was a wake-up call.
And for my coaching brain, I would think, okay, I think what you did obviously was so important to actually do that introspection. And what could I do differently? What are the parts where I wasn't perceived as having expertise in this? And why is it? Are there ways that I could manage up better? Are there ways that I could demonstrate my expertise? Because we all think you do this work all the time. And so everyone should know that I'm doing this work all the time, but your boss is busy doing their work and they're probably not noticing the work that you do all the time. So is there a way I can make it more evident and obvious to them that this is the work that I'm doing and what my expertise is in this work? Is it a leadership thing? Are there ways that I have to demonstrate my leadership? Is it their communication opportunities where there are ways that I can communicate better? And I think that's again, right? You can't change the system. You're not going to change your boss, but are there ways that I can show up and I can present myself differently that will be perceived differently so that next time, at least, it doesn't happen again? And I think that's the onus that we actually own and where we actually have control.
Absolutely. Well, I will say that in part, this business blossomed from that experience. Right? Like I felt like I lacked autonomy. I did go up the hierarchy to find out where was the disconnect here? Was it actually something I did wrong? Or was it the way the system set up? And I think there was some recognition of what had happened especially from my female counterparts who were kind of on the periphery watching the whole thing unfold. But I will say, recognized at a certain point that it wasn't going to happen with this particular institution or with these particular people. And there had to come a point where I was like, you know what? That's enough. Like, I recognize that the road is probably not going to end anywhere prosperous, at least for me. I'm just going to have to continue jumping through hoops and chasing a carrot that was possibly never in a place where I could actually reach it according to them. So, how can I still provide what I want to provide in a meaningful way that allows me to stand by my values and show my values to the people around me and show that I can still have strength, even if it wasn't where I had perhaps originally wanted? To be able to create an autonomous place with lots of heart was just an eye-opening experience. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. But I think from that came permission for other people to come out of the woodwork and be like, you know what? These are the things that make me special and unique and able to give to the community in my way. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm like, fantastic. And then one by one, right? Like there's this trickle effect, trickle down effect. So it's just been a lovely process to kind of see. And hopefully the rest of the world is noticing too, that even if there is misogyny in the workplace, that there are things that we can do about it. Not always easy.
Not always easy. And what you've done is certainly not easy, right? But it was making a win, gaining wisdom from that lesson that they taught you, right? Like that lack of opportunity was an opportunity for you to grow in different directions, but you get to decide what those directions are. They don't get to limit you. They get to have their own opinion and think about things, and you get to say, okay, what do I do? This is just information. What do I do with this information, and how do I make it? How do I get to grow so that I grow the ways that matter to me? Because you don't limit my growth. Like that's not an opportunity. Like you don't have that as a possibility.
I love it.
I get my own growth.
Yeah. One of the things that I learned when I was becoming a life coach was asking questions is really important. And so instead of asking the question, why is this happening to me? Changing the question to, how is this happening for me?
Yeah.
In other words, how is this situation making space for me to grow and transform? And when I flipped the question in this particular situation, everything changed. Everything changed because then it became a stepping stone for my success.
And that is such a powerful place to be able to say, how is this happening for me? But what it means is you have to take the time, you have to like nurture yourself and process the emotions that happen with that, right? Because when you're in that emotional state of feeling dejected, feeling unrecognized, feeling, overlooked, like those are not places where you're going to have like this brilliant idea out of, right? Like you have to let yourself be there, stay there for the time that you need to, and then take it back and say, okay, what are the pieces? What's the information? Well, maybe the information is that this institution is not valuing some of the things that I know how to do. Maybe the information I'm supposed to get out of this is that this leader does not see leadership opportunities in me. Okay, what do I now do with those information, and how can I transform that information? Like, where is it that I want to go? And how do I take those pieces of information now that I have them and say, okay, well, there's not only one way to grow. Like there are different paths, there are different things. How can I still get to my goal because I get to be in charge of that?
I love the way you put that. Yeah, excellent. So, this podcast was designed to help us to heal ourselves, our children, and our children's children.
I love that.
Do you have any words of advice for our listeners beyond what we've already discussed? I think this has been an excellent conversation with lots and lots of pearls.
Yeah, there's so many pieces. One of the things, and I know we kind of just touched on this when we pre-talked, but I think one of the things is that we often feel bad about taking the time for ourselves, particularly, I would say, as working moms, right? And we feel like every little bit needs to go, like if we're not at work, we have to give it back to the kid. And that's true, like even for people who don't have kids, you give it back to the family, you give it back to the friends, like that tends to be our roles. particularly as working women. And a couple things come to mind. First of all, I always use the analogy like you could be a stay-at-home mom or a school teacher, and you're still going to miss moments of your kid's life. Like there's nobody who's there for all the moments of your kids' lives. And I also think, and you know the literature much better than I do as a pediatrician, but that us not being there for every moment of our kids' lives is actually of a benefit to our kid. And I think about like the kid dropping a peanut butter and jelly sandwich on the floor. And if you're there, you pick it up, you decide whether it's appropriate for them to continue eating or not continue eating or doing things like that. And then they go on their case and they don't have to think about it. They don't have to problem solve. They don't have to work anything out. But if you're not there, they're like, oh, I just dropped it in the mud. Maybe I don't want to eat that. Or I just dropped it in the gravel. I'm going to try it. Ooh, I got a piece of gravel now on my teeth. Maybe I'm not going to eat that. Is there other food around? Are there other opportunities around? Like, what are the things? And all of a sudden, that kid has the opportunity to grow and to think about things. And I think sometimes, particularly again, as working moms, we have so much guilt about not being there for all the moments that we don't realize, like, and that's about us. That's our guilt because I wasn't there, as opposed to being about the kid and whether the kid really needed us at that moment or whether they actually got to problem solve. And I tell people all the time, like, even the 5 minutes on your drive home to park down the block and to jam out to music or sit in the car and just like take a few deep breaths, 5 minutes away from your kid before you drive in and then you get hit with all the things that we get hit with coming into a house. I think giving us that grace and giving us that ourselves that time and giving us permission to be away from your kid, to do the things and to think about it, about what the opportunities are for you to be so much more there when you are there, and for that kid to be able to grow because you weren't there at every moment. Like, I think that's something that's so important and so easily overlooked when we get into our own mind guilt, mom guilt, which is like all about us.
Right. I think that when we take those few minutes out for ourselves, this is the difference between us coming in with work still on our mind, especially if it was a disastrous work day, and then lashing out at our kids when we see a mess on the floor, versus creating some mental, emotional, even physical reserve where when we walk into our homes, we have that bandwidth to be able to see the spill on the floor and still be able to give our kids a hug and say, oh, I'm so glad to see you. Should we clean this up together? Right? Oh, huge difference. Same situations, but building that reserve is really important, you know? And that's what the kids remember is not being fearful when mom comes home, or when dad comes home, like, oh, I wonder what we're gonna, what they're gonna walk in with next, right? Like, versus, oh, I've been waiting all day to see you, mom. Give me a big hug, right? Like, teenagers, we don't know what to expect from them, but I mean, children.
Even for your teenagers, my daughter's 13 now, and like her learning that it's about control, right? Like I can't control that there's a spill on the floor. I can control how I react to the spill on the floor, and I can control what we do next about the spill on the floor. Like that's already done, and like, is it going to really, oh my gosh, why were you carrying too many things? Like, is that really going to help at this point?
Right. It's asking what could we have done differently to prevent it? And well, now that it's done, how do we fix it?
Yeah, and that is what I will say. I mean, when I think about my own transformation, so after I started doing professional development, I had the opportunity to have leadership opportunities within my institution and outside of my institution, you know, being the president of a national organization, doing those types of things, which I wouldn't have had, I think, if I didn't learn how to communicate better.
Mm.
But I think my academic career was better, my clinical career was better, my relationships with my partners were better, all of the things. But the biggest difference was how I can relate to my family and how I was when I showed up. And I remember I give this example all the time, but I think it's just like so so telling. Like my kid, I remember her being like not even talking yet. And we were outside, we were raking in the yard, and she had like her BlackBerry phone that she would walk around with. And I remember saying, "Hey, come on over here by me." And she held up a finger and she went to her phone and she started blah, 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 blah. And she was mimicking me, right? Because she'd seen me do that so many times. And that was just one of a zillion different things that I remember seeing her do. And then fast forward, about 10 years, and she's at a rock climbing wall gym with her friend. And her friend gets really scared going up. And she comes down. She's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm not doing that again. That was awful, blah, blah, blah." And she's like, "Listen, just put your feet up and go 1 or 2 steps, and then you can come right back down. But if you leave on a positive note, you're going to have so much better feelings about this, and you're not going to be scared if we ever come back to this again. So just do 1 or 2 steps and come right back down." And that's how we'll leave today. And that's who I want my kid to be, right? And that's why putting the time into myself was so important. And if you think about like, okay, mom guilt for not spending the time, I spent a lot of time learning professional development skills that I could have been giving to my kid. But what I was doing instead was I was learning them so that I could show my kid how she could be, rather than just like, oh, like this book on parenting says I should be kinder. Be kinder, right?
Yeah, we do a lot of that, don't we? It's like we know what we're supposed to do, and then we try to do it, and it just doesn't come off right. Like it doesn't fall correctly.
But that we're not giving ourselves the same grace that we're trying to teach our kids to get, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so interesting, but you need to take that time for yourself.
Thank you, Sharon. This gives so many people the permission to do what they need to do to be able to show up as the people they want to be within their families and within their communities. And yeah, it teaches our kids that they have a choice about how they show up as well. So thank you for that, Sharon.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Been fun.
Absolutely. It's such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Where can people find you?
So they can find me at theintentionalsurgeon.com. I have my podcast, which is also called The Intentional Surgeon Podcast, which is on Apple and all the different podcast formats, things. You can find me there. And they can reach out with Facebook and LinkedIn, primarily the social media, a little bit of Instagram. I should be better at that. I need lessons on how to do that. Maybe that's my next thing to learn.
If there are any youngsters out there, they seem so adept with Instagram. So I will post all of Dr. Stein's social media handles and her website in the show notes. Again, Sharon, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
All right.
Hey, if you like what you're hearing, give this podcast a 5-star rating and share it with your friends and family. If you want to learn more about my mom and what she does, visit her at imwellmd.com and subscribe to her email list. If you leave her a comment, you might just get a shout out in her next podcast episode. If you'd like coaching or support, she has programs available for you and your whole family. My mom is a great pediatrician and a great person, and I hope you like her podcast episodes. Have a great day. Goodbye.